I'm Bill Kassel, and this is Free Expression. This program is all about conveying the Christian message from a Catholic point of view and defending the liberty which makes it possible to do that. We discuss how religious participation affects health, and we reflect on the impact of a unique hermit priest. Join us, sit back, and enjoy some free expression. There's no doubt that faith promotes spiritual well-being, but can prayer or regular church attendance help make us better physically? Well, Jesus healed the sick. Of course, that was Jesus. Over the centuries, people have claimed that religious devotion has health benefits, and there's some scientific evidence to back those claims. Is that research definitive? And if being a believer is healthy, what's the connection? How does it work? Dr. John Sotosanti is a physician who has looked deeply into the link between religion and health. In a recent article for Newsmax, he recounts some of the inquiries that are leading scientists and health professionals to take the healing power of faith more seriously. Dr. John, thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Bill. Thank you for the invitation.
In that Newsmax piece, you advised Robert Kennedy, our proposed Secretary of Health and Human Services, to pay close attention to the evidence that's coming to light. Just what does science know about the relationship between religion and health?
There's a growing body of research. There's at least 2,500 studies that have appeared in peer-reviewed medical literature that show that practicing one's religion is associated with improved physical and mental health and even longevity. Those that identify themselves as religious have lowered rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and suicide.
Is it just a psychological phenomenon, or can they show that there's a direct physical connection?
There's both, because the psychological phenomenon has to do with people feeling calm and less anxiety, more at peace with themselves and the world. Those that are under a lot of stress have cortisol released into the bloodstream, and that causes problems, particularly if it goes on for a long time. It definitely affects healing. In my surgical practice, I would see that. If someone lost a spouse, all of a sudden their health declined, both physical and mental. And the evidence that I like to talk about has been published in a large textbook. By large, it's well over 1,000 pages. I think the cost is over $180. It was published by Oxford University Press. And it's called the Handbook of Religion and Health. And it's written mainly for researchers, medical doctors, and therapists. It has 3 authors. They're from Duke and Harvard. The lead author is Dr. Koenig, and one of the authors is a biostatistician at Harvard, Tyler Vanderweeld, who makes sure that the studies included in the book are valid and rigorous. There's one study that I would like to talk about that really caught my attention. It's called the Nurses' Health Study, and it was performed by researchers at Harvard. It included 74,534 female nurses, middle-aged to older. And at the onset of the study, these nurses were free of cardiovascular disease and cancer, and they were followed from 1996 to 2012, which is, of course, a 16-year period.
Yeah.
They self-reported the frequency of attendance at religious services. They either never went, or they occasionally went, or they went once a week, or more than once a week. And at the conclusion of the study, the researchers looked at all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, and cancer mortality. And the results were amazing. The nurses who went to their religious place of worship more than once per week had a 33% lower risk of mortality in the 16-year period. And if they went once per week, they had a 26% reduction in mortality. And if they went occasionally, there was still a 13% risk of death compared to the ones that said they never went at all. And the cardiovascular mortality was reduced in the churchgoers or religious places of worship to 20% less risk of cardiovascular mortality, and cancer risk was 21% risk. And if we ask the question, what was the cause of that? We can only really speculate, but I would say that, number one, these people had enhanced social support. They overall had less depression. They tended to not smoke. They had increased optimism. They had many friends. And there's one thing that sets religion apart from any other activity that might give you these same support systems. And that is the ones that were going on a regular basis or more than once a week tended to have a profound religious belief which gave them a sense of meaning in their life. They believed in the potential for an eternal afterlife. In other words, they had hope, because if you don't have hope, you have a void, and that is filled with despair.
Is there any denominational correlation? Is it, Catholic versus Protestant, Christian versus Jewish, anything like that?
In this particular study, they did not look at that, which I think is good. I would like to think that this is applicable to many people. There have been studies that showed other denominations that were not actually church. For the Jewish people, for instance, one interesting study showed that secular Jewish people compared the rigorous followers of Judaism. The secular ones had heart attacks much earlier in their life than those who were very devout Jews.
What about style of worship? Has anybody ever looked at, say, a more charismatic, emotionally engaging style of worship versus a more sedentary liturgical approach? Has that been examined?
That has not really been examined. There are so many studies that are yet to be done, but there is a very convincing body of literature that shows tremendous benefits. One of the things I would like to talk about is called the death by despair. Bill, have you heard that term?
Yeah, I have.
It came about, and I just found this out, it came about back in, I think it was 2015. There was a paper by two Princeton economists, Ann Case and her spouse, Angus Deaton. And in 2015, they wrote about the deaths of despair in America. And in 2021, actually wrote a best-selling book. They claim that deaths of despair have been rising dramatically since 1999. And these deaths of despair include death due to suicide, drug overdoses, and alcoholism. And at the same time that the deaths of despair have been rising in the United States, the numbers that attend places of worship has dramatically decreased, which tends to lead one to question whether or not the American relinquishment of faith, or at least overt expression of faith, is negatively affecting the hope and mental health of the people in our country.
Over the years, we've heard about faith healing, the preacher who lays his hands on the person and says a prayer and brings about some sort of alleged healing. Is there any research that's been done to either validate or debunk that idea?
Very interesting question. I'm not aware of research, but I actually witnessed an incident of that. in which I had a patient with terminal cancer, and everything had been tried for her. And she did not go to a particular church. And it was like she needed help right away. And I had heard of a particular faith healer who laid hands on a person, and the person got better. And her name was Betty, and she told me a week later that she had gone to this place of worship, and it was being televised, and there were like 500 people in the audience. And this minister picked her out of the crowd and basically said, I know there's somebody here who has terrible stomach cancer. Would you please come up? And she came up, and the minister said, I'd like you to see you run across the stage here. And she said, I can't hardly move. He put his hand on her head and said, do you believe in the power of Christ to be able to heal you? And she said, yes. And she passed out. It's called being explained in the spirit. Right. And she told me that she got up and she was able to run across the room. And she told me that all the pain, this was a month later when I saw her again. She said that all the pain is gone. The cancer wasn't gone. It was widespread. She ultimately died of cancer, but she died peacefully without pain. And so that was an amazing thing that I witnessed.
Fascinating. Now, in your Newsmax article, you note that there is a good deal of resistance, particularly coming from the left, about the idea of linking faith and health.
There is a situation in our country where we have the secularists and those on the left that are reluctant to acknowledge or promote these findings that religious faith brings about health. And this raises an important question. Is ideological bias preventing us from fully embracing a powerful tool for public health? And can that change with the new administration? Because this reluctance seems to come from the left's complicated relationship with religion. Many progressives, as you know, Bill, view religious institutions, particularly conservative ones, as obstacles to their social and political agenda around issues like abortion, LGBTQ rights, and secularism in government. But there's a tremendous cost as American health declines. Something that amazed me is that I knew that we spend in this country a lot on health. In fact, we spend more money per person on health in the United States than any other country in the world. Yet our health is not that high. The average American today lives somewhere around 76 to 78 years. There are at least 40 countries in which the average citizen lives longer. In fact, all the way up to age 84 on the average, or in several countries. And although even in the Western European countries and places like Japan and South Korea, people live much longer than we do in the United States, which says to me we do have a problem.
During the last Trump administration, they launched a group called the Religion, Spirituality, and Health Scientific Interest Group. Where does that stand? One doesn't hear very much about that, and do you think that that might be revived under the new Trump administration?
That is my hope. I've actually contacted the head of it and going to be receiving newsletters, et cetera, and I'd like to become involved in it if I possibly can. It plans on doing whatever it can to improve or add to the body of research that we already have. And of course, once we have enough research, and I honestly think we have plenty of research now, once we feel we have enough, what can we do to get that in the hands of the media? And I think to some extent the government can help with that. But the other thing that has to happen is we have to get that information into the school systems. Kids are taught what they can do to become healthy. They can watch their weight. They can eat the proper food. But shouldn't they be taught that the scientific literature shows that people of faith live longer on the average? Of course, the naysayers will say, well, you can meditate and get the same benefits. And that's not true, because meditation is a very lonely way of obtaining a sense of peace and tranquility. And one of the most interesting studies is a study that started at Harvard University in the year 1938. So we now have somewhere around 86 years of data. And after 86 years and millions of dollars of studying, they were looking at well-being, and ultimately it was called the happiness, or its nickname, the happiness study. And the one thing that they could say brought about profound happiness was that people need to have enduring relationships with other people in their life. And there was a book recently published on the study, and the author of the book said, you have to have at least one person who you know well enough or trust well enough who will come over in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning if you are having a panic attack to sit and talk with you. And I thought, isn't that interesting? If you go to church regularly, at least in my situation, I can think of 20 people that would probably come over in the middle of the night if I called them, because the relationships are very profound. We're all believing in the same thing. We not only go once a week or more than once a week, but we join in study groups. We help the poor together. We do so many things together. So I don't know of another situation that comes close to giving a sense of having enduring in many relationships better than going to a place of worship on a regular basis.
Well, now, a year or so ago, you wrote a book that chronicled your own spiritual journey. It was called Mortal Adhesions. A surgeon battles the 7 deadly sins to find faith, happiness, and inner peace. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my dad told me that I had to grow up and be successful, because he was born in Italy and he felt a lot of prejudice when he came over against the Italian immigrants. And so I took it seriously, and I went to Ivy League college, I went to graduate school, and I went to postgraduate training to do surgery, and I was driven to grow a big practice. We had a large surgical practice with over 50 people employed in the practice. And I had everything that the American dream could give you: a big house, fancy car, worldwide travel, inventions, and on and on. But what all these things brought me was a lot of stress, so much so that I had debilitating back and neck pain, stomach cramps, high blood pressure, panic attacks, and eventually stage 3 prostate cancer. And then an amazing series of events happened to me that convinced me that God does exist, that he cares about me, and that we must turn to him. And then once I surrendered and changed my behaviors, I experienced much peace, love, and contentment. Neck and back pain disappeared, as did my stomach problems. And I've been cancer-free for almost 20 years. And I felt I had to share my story with the world, so I wrote the book.
Well, look, do you have a website or any means for people to keep up with your work and maybe find out more about the book?
Yes. The best place to go is my website, and it's Mortal, M-O-R-T-A-L, Adhesions, A-D-H-E-S-I-O-N-S, one word, no period between, at mortaladhesions.com. You can find out more about the book, some of the new work I'm getting into on the intersection of religion and health. I will eventually put on there. You can contact me. My personal email address is on there as well. But there's a lot about the book, and if you want, you can go from there to Amazon to get the book.
Dr. John Sotosanti, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens once Kennedy is confirmed and the Trump administration gets rolling. See if the government takes a second look at this nexus of health and faith and see what happens.
Yeah, it could be exciting.
Well, thanks very much for taking time to speak with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Bill. Thank you very much.
Kevin Wells is an award-winning journalist, sports writer, and evangelist who faced a family crisis involving addiction and deep emotional wounds. He recounts his story of that suffering and the intervention of a holy priest in his book, The Hermit, The Priest Who Saved a Soul, a Marriage, and a Family, new from Ignatius Press. He's here with us now. Kevin, thanks for speaking with us.
Bill, it's great to be with you today. It's good to be on your show.
Please lay out the situation that you address in the book.
Sure, I'll try to consolidate it here for your listener. In 2009, I had an aneurysm, and in the aftermath, I had a failed invasive brain surgery, and I should have died. Sort of the move just going forward, a priest and his assistant came into my neuro ICU room and prayed over me, and presto, I was healed. All the blood and the fluids and the malformation went away, and thank God I was alive. And when I went home, I'd been married to Christopher about 10 years at that point, and because I was very close to death, I realized that I really wanted to get to know God a lot better. And you know, I was a practicing Catholic back then. I was a faithful Catholic. I wasn't caught up in any kind of mortal sin, but I did want to know Him more because I was close to judgment, and I wanted to spend more time in adoration, more rosaries, more weekday masses, etc. So as I began to sort of go this direction, Krista, my wife, I think it opened up a wound of shame in her from her past. She didn't know about it. I didn't know about it. But it was a mother wound, and she felt shame because she wasn't going there, I guess, is what she would tell you if she was on the line. And she began to secretly binge drink, and it really got bad for many years until a holy priest named Father Martin Flume, who is now a consecrated hermit, led her to healing through really kind of taking a spiral staircase down into her woundedness and leading her to daily mass, weekday, daily time, 1 to as many as 3 hours a day in adoration, weekly confessions, intensive spiritual direction. And Krista was healing, and right at sort of the climax of her healing is when COVID-19 came. And the very thing that was allowing Krista to heal was taken away. There was a moratorium, as we all know. We don't like to go back to those days that the Catholic Church worldwide put on the sacraments. And I was scared to death. But this holy priest, Father Martin Flume, he was a father to her soul. He was Krista's spiritual father, and he worked even harder at his priesthood at that time of COVID 2020 to shepherd her and to guide her, or I should say guard her from these little demons that had worked to hurt her for so many years. So he became the father of her soul during that time, and I praise God every day for him. I'll never see him again, and Krista won't either, because he's now offered the remainder of his life as a hermit, where he's sort of become a Holocaust. He's offered himself as a Holocaust, mortifications, penances, and prayers for the remainder of his life to God, sort of for a recovery of sort of sanity in the world, and really a recovery of holy priesthood. But he's the one working through God, or God working through Father Flume, that really healed my wife. And I'll just end with this, Bill. In the aftermath of him becoming a hermit, Krista encouraged me. I didn't want to write the book. I didn't want to put my wife's stuff on the street. But Krista said, I want to expose myself so I can expose the holy priesthood of Father Flume and how he behaved during COVID-19.
It's difficult for me, and I think probably for a lot of people, to understand this kind of extreme monastic urge. Why would he want so thoroughly to withdraw from the world, especially after he obviously had such a profound impact on your lives?
That's a wonderful question. A lot of people have asked the same thing. I would answer it in the way that because he was, just for your listener, if you can sort of imagine an image of him, he was sort of looked like a heavy, bearded Old Testament prophet, just a very holy and wise man. And he had studied the lives of the great precincts, of the hermits, of St. Anthony of the Desert. He understood what John Vianney did through his penances and mortifications to bring back this town of Ars that had been guillotined by the French Revolution. They had lost their faith. He understood the way that prayer, penances, and mortification, oftentimes even more so than, let's just say, priests who spend the entire day, let's say, at a soup kitchen or in a prison ministry or whatever. Father Flume had fallen in love with the ascetics, with sort of what life given over to prayer, how God would step into that and sort of say, well, this priest has offered himself as an expiation. All of his days, all of his hours are spent asking me to help the world. So in a supernatural, sort of unseen way, Father Flume felt that in 2021, when he asked his bishop for permission to become a consecrated hermit, it is a vocation. It's a sort of a rare one. Yeah. But when he asked for permission to sort of disappear, he knew from his readings of the hermit priest saints from years past of how they turned around villages, towns, and even countrysides because of their self-emptying life of prayer and penance.
Having had this experience, having been touched by this very unique individual, what's the next chapter? How are you now?
Oh, my gosh, Bill, life's great. I'm on my honeymoon. So Krista and I were suffering for 8 years. Krista was caught up in the web of an addiction. I've come to believe that Satan is directly involved with alcoholism. And now that Krista's been freed, liberated by, what I'll say is the sacraments. A lot of folks, as we know, will go to Alcoholics Anonymous or counselors or rehabilitation centers, which is wonderful. I mean, that's sort of the way it's routinely drawn up. But it was Krista who was healed through the sacraments of the church during COVID, who really, the demons started to flee. They realized that they were sort of rubbing up against something they weren't accustomed to. They couldn't penetrate adoration or the Eucharist or confession. So Krista and I are on our honeymoon. This is we're 25 years married now, and I'll tell you, Bill, we've never been happier.
That's wonderful. The book is The Hermit. It's from Ignatius Press. So where can people find out about it?
I would go to Ignatius.com or Amazon or your local Catholic bookstore. It's getting out there pretty good right now. So, and if it's not at your local Catholic bookstore, maybe ask for it. I saw a copy at Barnes & Noble the other day. So, but Ignatius.com is who published it, and I love Ignatius, so maybe that's the best place to get the book.
Kevin Wells, The Hermit, the priest who saved a soul, a marriage, and a family. Thanks very much for sharing this with us. This has to have been a difficult experience, but a unique and blessed experience at the same time. We're grateful to hear about it.
Thank you very much, Bill. It was, and it was good to spend time with you.
Be with us next time when we explore other aspects of religious communication and look deeper into the great Christian heritage of free expression. Free Expression with Bill Kassel is a production of Good Shepherd Catholic Radio and Company Publications, where good books, good music, and good radio are always good company. Dan Curris provided technical assistance. Theme and incidental music are by Dan Adam. The program was produced and directed by Bill Kassel. This is Good Shepherd Catholic Radio.